Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So it's been a few weeks since phase 1 of our micro brush toy quad conversion, and we converted our Cyma X5Z, or in this case the Lishi Toys L6052W, into this awesome little micro FPV brushed quad. Now, a lot of you hopefully have followed on that build, and this was meant to be your first, your foot in the door into the awesome world of FPV flying, and I hope you really enjoyed that. But if you haven't seen that first video, I'm going to link it up here, so do check that out first. Now, for a lot of you who did try that, you might find that the performance of these toy quads is still a little bit lacking, and you want something with even more performance, even better flight characteristics. So that is what we're going to be doing in phase 2 in this video. Alright, so stay tuned. So in phase 1, we got a pair of FPV goggles because we converted our toy quad into an FPV micro brush quad, and we put in an FPV camera, and the goggles is used to view that FPV feed. Now, if you haven't seen FPV, the phase 1 of this conversion, then this is one of the cheapest quads that you can get. It's around 2,500 pesos. If you want to go, for the more fancier goggles, that will set you back around $400 to $500 for a brand new pair of Fat Shark goggles. But yeah, if you're just starting out, then these are probably the cheapest goggles on the market right now. And this one is a typical toy grade quad transmitter. And usually when you buy a toy grade quad, they come with a transmitter because it's usually 1-to-1. So every time you buy a new quad, you get a new transmitter, and you can't really use these transmitters for pretty much anything else. So here in phase 2, we are going to be changing our transmitter to something like this. Now this is a Taranis QX7, and this is a programmable transmitter, so you can bind different receivers or different quads up to one radio. So you can see I have 4 radios set up here, and depending on which quad I'm flying, I can just choose one and then edit the settings for each one. So this comes out around a little over $100 or more than 5,000 pesos. And if you are on a budget, there are other options like the FlySky i6 transmitter, and that one is also good as well. And I know a lot of people are really great pilots who still fly on the FlySky i6. Now the main difference between this transmitter and your toy quad transmitter is the sticks. You are going to get much finer control, much better control over your quad, and you have all of these programmable switches, so you can assign different functions for each one. Like for example, I have my arm switch here, I have my beeper here if you have a beeper on your quad, and I have my mode switch here. And you can program all of these switches and buttons to suit whatever you're liking. So this is going to be the major purchase that we are going to be needing in phase 2. So if you are on a budget, I recommend you go for the FlySky. But yeah, so this is something that's going to be a requirement if you are going to be following along on this build. Now these frame, as I mentioned in the previous video, these are meant for 8520 motors, which are a bit thicker than the 720 motors that your your toy quad usually will have. These are these motors I got from another toy quad, the Ishin E50, and these are new 8520 motors. Now I'm not sure if you can see the difference, but they are a bit thicker, 1.5 millimeters thicker to be exact. So if you haven't seen the previous video, or if your toy quad doesn't have working motors anymore, and you can't and you are unable to find a broken toy quad anywhere with working motors, then you can still follow along in this phase 2 of the build, because this is practically going to be a new build for you. But if you have a broken toy quad and you weren't able to follow you weren't able to follow the steps in phase 1 because you didn't have working parts anyway, so you can still jump onto phase 2, onto this video, the phase 2 conversion, because you can just source the parts, buy them new, and you'll still be able to come out with a nice micro brushed quad. Now, I discussed a lot of things in the phase 1 video, such as motor rotation, prop rotation, and how the flight controller expect the motors to spin a particular way so that it's able to control the yaw, and also how it stabilizes in the air. So yeah, so there's a lot of things you can still learn in the phase 1 video. So if you haven't seen that, I will link to that in the description, and also up here as a card, so do check that out. Now, just to discuss some of the parts, this is the micro 100mm generic quadcopter frame. This is the Lantian 105. I discussed these frames in the previous video, so do check that out. So again, these 720 motors, they are a bit thin. So these frames are meant for 8520 motors. So again, we're going to need to wrap that in tape, just like this one, just to make it thicker. And we're also going to be using this Eachine F3 Evo brushed flight controller. This is going to be the new flight controller that we are going to be using for this build, and this is a little bit more complicated than the ones that comes with your toy quad, but it also gives you tons more flexibility. You can reverse motor orientation, and can configure a lot of things. Now here, this is a micro D8 FreeSky receiver. Not sure why it's not focusing. There you go. It's a FreeSky 8-channel S-bus receiver, and it's really tiny. It's really small, so it's going to fit in nicely. It's going to be very light. And as we are also going to be using another FPV all-in-one camera like this. It's the Cyclops. So I might transplant this over to our next build, or get another one of my cameras lying around. But yeah, so that's basically all of the things that we're going to be needing, as well as some propellers, but I'll show you that in a little bit later. So without further ado, let's go straight onto this build. So here we have the Eachine F3 Evo brushed flight controller board, and up close. And as you can see, these there are arrows printed on the board, which indicates the orientation of the board, which is this side has to be pointing to the front of the quad. But you can always rotate that in Betaflight. But if you're for starters, we'll just keep it at the default orientation. And this one also handles 2S, so that basically just means you can put a more powerful battery, 2S in parallel, which are 2 cells in parallel. And we will just be pre-tinning the pads that we are concerned with. Pre-tinning basically means we're going to be applying some solder lead onto the battery terminals, motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, and motor 4. There's motor 5 and 6, but we're not going to be using that, so we'll just keep that blank, untouched. And I believe these are for the buzzer. And we have UART 1, 2, 3, which these are asynchronous transmission pads so that allows the flight controller to communicate with whatever those pads are connected with. In this case, we are going to be using UART 2 for our receiver, which I showed you earlier. So yeah, we're just going to be pre-tuning these pads, and then we'll go on and connect our motors and connect this up to our frame. So here we have our Lantian 105 frame, and I put back the top on this frame, and that is because I wanted to test fit our Eachine F3 Evo brushed flight controller board onto that. This flight controller does come with double-sided mounting tape, but I couldn't find it. I think I might have used it last time, so I just used good old foam tape or mounting tape 3M from 3M, and then yeah, I just wanted to see how this is going to fit onto that board, because I didn't want to put that in and have to redo it all over again if it doesn't fit. So we can always remove this top later on, but yeah, I just wanted to see how I was going to fit that board in. And then once I have that, yeah, just gonna probably remove the backing and stick that on to that frame. Let's just put that aside for now, and that'll give us a nice, yeah, that'll allow us to really center that flight controller board onto that frame. or at least, you know, as close as possible. So there you go. It's not going to go further than that because the clearance on those two standoffs are a little bit too tight, but yeah, I think that's okay. Sticks out a little bit on the back, but yeah, again, that's fine, not a problem. So now that I've mounted my flight controller onto this frame, I can just remove the screws, and then we're going to go on and solder our wires onto this, our motors and our wires onto this flight controller. You're gonna need to decide which battery terminals you're going to solder onto your flight controller. Now this one comes with a Eachine F3 Evo brushed flight controller, and this is good. This is a micro lossy connector. This is good if you have a lot of stock Cyma X5Z batteries which plug into that, so at least you don't have to change your batteries. But in my case, I have some high voltage LiPos for tiny hoops, and this uses the JST 2.0 or JST PH connector, so I'm going to be using this one instead of this one, but again, it depends on which batteries you have. So this goes on to the back of the board, the red one goes here and the black one goes here. So let's just solder this, as well as solder on our motors as well as our receiver. Right now we've finished hooking up all of the wires and all of our motors onto this flight controller board. We have our motors 1, 2, 3, and 4 soldered there. White is positive, and also red is positive, and blue is ground, black is ground. And we also connected our pigtail to VBAT, and this is also connected to our VTX and FPV camera. And we've also hooked up our receiver onto UR2. So now here is our finished build. Now you can see from the side that it is quite a tight stack inside. I haven't screwed that in yet, just so I can show you. So the VTX is here, mounted on top of the flight controller board with mounting tape, also as well as the FPV camera, but I probably will add some hot glue just to keep that more secure. Now the receiver I mounted on the top plate, underneath the top plate, and I put a piece of masking tape just to make sure that you know, none of the contacts will touch and cause a short circuit. But yeah, it is a very tight build, and you can see that the VTX button is still accessible from the side. So if we need to change up the channels, then we can do so. But we'll probably have to bind this beforehand, and we'll bind this beforehand to our transmitter. And once it's bound up, then that's good to go. Before we bind our receiver to our transmitter, I forgot to show you what I was going to do with the antenna. So I got a piece of zip tie, just zip tied it to the frame, to the top plate of the frame, and then I have this antenna and a piece of shrink tubing. So I'm just gonna slip this here. It's a bit of a tight fit, so we'll probably have to align this with the antenna. This piece of wire, this is the antenna for our receiver, and then we'll just slide it over both of them. So here we have our lighter, and we just need to pass quickly over the heat shrink tubing so that it shrinks and it forms a nice tight seal, and that's going to hold our antenna in place. And then we can just cut off the excess. Make sure you don't cut the wire. I think the wire ends up over here, so we'll just cut the excess zip tie, and we're good to go. We now have our antenna, and it's going to be quite sturdy, and our VTX antenna is sticking out the back. So yeah, that's good to go. Now let's go bind our receiver with our quad. So in order for our transmitter to communicate with our new quad, we need to set up a new quad in our transmitter. So this is for Taranis QX7. So depending on which transmitter you have, it might be different, but basically you go to your model selection page, and then you click create model. And again, this is how it is when you're using a Taranis QX7. So I'm just going to go with the defaults. Yep. Alright, throttle pitch, enter launch, confirm. Alright, so once we have that, we can just go to page, and then we'll give it a nice name. I can't think of a name. Let's just name this phase 2 for now. Now the binding procedure is pretty similar regardless of which radio you have. And here I just go stroll down all the way to the receiver. So the receiver I have on that microquad is a D8 receiver, so I'm just gonna switch that to that one. And then you first put your transmitter into bind mode by clicking this one, and then you put your quad into bind mode by plugging in by holding the button on the receiver, and then while you're holding that, you plug a battery in to the terminal. So once that's set, you just let go, and then unplug the batteries, and then you press exit, and that should bind the two of them. Our flight controller came pre-installed with Cleanflight as its firmware, and while I do recommend flashing it with Betaflight, that's beyond the scope of this video, so let's just use Cleanflight. So if you don't have it yet, go to Chrome Web Store and install Cleanflight and run it. And once you have your quad connected to your computer via USB, click on Connect on Cleanflight, and you should be taken to a page, to a screen that looks like this. Now we need to go to the receiver tab and just make sure that our channel order is AETR, because that's what we have on our transmitter. Now next we need to go to the ports tab, where we set UART2, where we have our receiver connected, and we turn on serial RX, and then hit save and reboot. Now it's going to reboot your flight controller and disconnect Cleanflight, so you just need to connect it again. And once it's connected, you go now to the modes tab, where we need to set up our arm switch on aux1, which is channel 5, and then we need to set our mode, which is on aux2. We need to set our angle and horizon modes, and it's up to you, but this is how I would recommend, so that when it's on the off position, that it always defaults to angle mode, and when the switch is in the middle position, it's in horizon mode, and if it's on neither the off and the middle position, it's going to be in acro mode. So we just hit on save, and then next we are going to go into the config tab, where we will just make sure that our motors is set to brushed motors. We have motor stop on, and then we can give our craft name a name whatever we want, like phase 2. And then we also need to make sure that we are set for serial receiver and using the S-Bus protocol. And once that's done, we can just click save and reboot again. So here now is our finished build of our micro brushed quad. So you might notice that I now have two antennas on there, because apparently the D8 receiver wasn't working, so I had to replace it with an XM Plus receiver, which has a diversity antenna. Now this is the maiden flight of for micro brush quad, and I'm just flying around the house. It's my parents' house, and you will notice that the VTX video signal does not really like to go through concrete, so that's why the video is breaking up really badly. Not as badly as here in a DVR as it was in the actual goggles, but yeah, it was pretty bad. So yeah, I was just flying around the house, cruising along. And I wanted to try how this microbrush quad performed in acro mode, so I flew it quite a little bit high up, and then I attempted to do a quick barrel roll, but well, just take a look at the video. So it crashed really hard, and the Lantian 105 frame, one of the arms snapped, as you can see that one of the motors is hanging quite loose by the wires. So unfortunately, after just like 2 or 3 flights, that was the end for the Lantian 105 frame, but thankfully we have another frame that we can use. Fortunately, I still had the other micro quad lying around, and I took that micro 100mm frame, and I transplanted all of the parts of our build onto that, and after like it was just around a 5 to 10 minute process of moving all of the parts around. And once I've had I just flew this one this morning on a coffee break, and yeah, this micro brushed quads, these are great fun for flying around the house, and this was just around my apartment, and it's great for flying around the house, flying through doors and flying through windows. And you won't be able to do this if you were on a 5-inch quad, because that would be so much bigger, and the with so much power in a 5-inch quad, you'd be crashing around in no time. But this environment lends itself perfectly if you have a micro brushed quad like this, or if you have a tiny whoop style ducted micro quad. Then yeah, this environment is great for going up and down the stairwell, going out the windows and stuff. So yeah, of course, it does take some getting used to when you're flying FPV, because let's face it, it's a really different experience. So if this is your first quad, regardless if it's a 5-inch quad or a micro quad, then yeah, it's going to get some. There's a steep learning curve, and you're gonna have to get used to flying FPV. Fortunately, I have a great video series, a video tutorial on how to fly FPV, which I'm going to link up here somewhere. And I hope you do check that out, because I go through the basics of forward flight, coordinated turns, and all of that. All of the basics that will help you get started flying FPV. So be sure to check that out. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. If you did, click on the like button. Make sure you're subscribed, so if I come up with new videos like these, you get notified. And be sure to hit that bell button as well, so you get a notification every time I put out a new video. And so I'm going to leave you with some more videos of me flying around the house and of our micro brush quad. But as always, keep building and keep flying.